Daily news and analysis. We keep you informed and inspired.
This is World Today.
Hello and welcome to World Today. I'm Ding Hen in Beijing. Coming up, China has set 4.5 to 5% as the country's 2026 economic growth target. China will send a special envoy to the Middle East for mediation on the Iran conflict. A U.S. court is ordering U.S. Customs to process refunds on illegal Trump tariffs. The European Union proposes made in the EU rules for strategic sectors. To listen to this episode again or to catch up on our previous episodes, you can download our podcast by searching World Today. First up, a government work report says China is targeting an economic growth of 4.5% to 5% this year, and it will strive for better in real practice. Main economic targets also include an increase in consumer price index of about 2%. China has pledged to continue to implement a more proactive fiscal policy in 2026. The work report has been submitted to the country's national top legislature for deliberation. The 14th National People's Congress opened its fourth session on Thursday. Delivering the report, Chinese Premier Li Qiang said the country's economy has proved to be remarkably resilient over the past year. The report says China will open wider to the outside world with efforts in expanding market access and opening up more areas, especially in the services industry. China is vowing to drive advances in original innovation and breakthroughs in core technologies. In the meantime, the draft outline of China's 15th five-year plan has been submitted to the national top legislature for review. So joining us now on the line are Professor Jiang Gong from the University of International Business and Economics, as well as Sultan Ali, a China Affairs observer and a retired Air Force officer based in Pakistan. So thank you very much for joining us, Sultan and Professor Gong. Professor Gong, to start with you, let's begin with China's economic growth target for 2026. Is this a realistic target in your opinion?
It is a little bit the conservative side. They're not talking about a particular point of growth. They're talking about a range of growth between 4.5% and 5%. And it also says that they will do their best to sort of reach the high end of this. And if you compare the growth this last year, 2025, it's 5% on target. So I think it's already getting itself some room so that even the economy is not growing as fast as last year. There's a fairly large cushion. So I think it's a realistic target, and I think it's quite likely that 4.5% is something that's not that difficult to achieve, in my view.
So what do you make of the main headwinds or uncertainty that China's economy is faced with at home and abroad over the course of this year, Professor Gong?
I think there are challenges both domestically as well as internationally. Domestically, I think we're still facing a sort of a slowing down of the real estate property market. The traditional economies, the traditional parts of the economy is still sort of anemic, in my view. Coupled with the debt problem associated with the local governments. These are the old problems, and the government trying to do their best trying to address this problem. And internationally, I think it's mostly the challenge manifesting in the unstable international environment, global environment. We have multiple wars going on at this point. And also, these wars have implications for the global oil supply, global supply chain. All these things are challenged. We did a very good exports for last year. International trade grew by 6% last year. Whether we'll be able to maintain the same momentum, I'm more on the conservative side. I think the international environment, that sort of turbulence right now, is the biggest challenge, and hopefully we can behind these wars very quickly, and global flows of goods and capitals could follow very quickly.
Okay, so Sultan, going to you. Some say the growth target for this year is a signal of China's further shift from a so-called numbers first growth mindset towards a quality first or quality oriented one. Would you agree?
Well, I absolutely agree, Ding Heng, because the target reflects a pivot towards quality-driven growth and also a focus on innovation, sustainability, and balanced development. Moreover, a maturing economy where social welfare and environmental responsibility matter as much as GDP. So, in a nutshell, it is quality-first growth for a maturing economy.
Now, the work report has pledged to further improve living standards and boost the consumer spending, saying that the government would issue 250 billion yuan or some 36 billion US dollars in this year in terms of bonds for rebates to consumers to participate in those trade-in programs. So, Professor Gong, how can China boost domestic demand in the near future?
Yeah, well, this is a continuation of the program last year. One of the challenges of China's economic growth is to beef up domestic consumption. And obviously, one way of doing this is to, provide some incentives, essentially rebates from tax collected, as well as some fiscal subsidies for consumption. The scale of subsidies this year, as said in this document, is actually a much reduced amount compared with last year. You look at the $36 billion, I mean, that's a huge amount of money, right? It
Yeah.
goes a long way in terms of boosting consumer expenditures. So I think, the effect of this will be felt soon. The way to finance this is to, partially is through issuance of government bonds, long-term bonds. Last year, there's empirical evidence to show that these rebates, these incentives do help with consumption, and I would expect the same pattern into this year.
So, Sultan, in your opinion, how can China boost the domestic demand and the consumer spending not only for this year, but over the course of the next 5 years, namely the 15th five-year plan period in China? What do you make of the main factors that are still, prohibiting or curtailing China's potential to unleash its consumer power?
Yeah. What the professor just mentioned, strengthening the social safety nets to reduce precautionary savings. Now, it was just mentioned that the issuance of the 250 billion yuan in consumer bonds for trade-in programs is not only bold, but it is a near-term stimulus. Beyond this, China can boost demand by expanding the middle class and encouraging consumption of green, digital, and high-quality goods. Also, strengthening social safety nets, healthcare pensions, education to reduce precautionary savings and free up household spending. Also, promoting urbanization and rural revitalization, which are very important and they naturally expand the consumer markets. Now, together, these measures aim to shift growth from investment heavy to consumption driven.
So, Professor Gong, I mean, if we talk about those government subsidized trading programs, consumer trading programs, I think they are more often than not focused on consumption on the material side, on consumption of material goods, right? But nowadays, it seems a political focus or a policy focus is more on boosting, the services consumption in China. So with that in mind, do you think there is a shift when you were mentioning that this year's quota for these trading programs was actually reduced compared to last year's quota?
Well, there's actually economics word for this. It's called durable good. Previously, the rebates and incentives are mostly associated with purchases of durable goods. A large portion of it has to do with things related to renovation of new houses, new condo apartments, or moving to a new condo apartments. With the slowing down the real estate market, I think a lot of these expenditures are going away, or at least they're not growing as fast as in the past, maybe even reduced. So I think the focus is the service-oriented consumption. Things, I think there's a structural change going on in China's consumption. People are not spending as much as things related to the housing, as opposed to things related to a better consumption experience, things related to leisure, for example, not necessarily associated with decorating or refurbishing an apartment. To the consumption, in my view. So the government does not want to leave behind that part of the consumption. In other words, things related to experience goods, right? Things related to leisure, travel, dining experiences, things of that nature, as opposed to things related to refurbishing an apartment, renovating an apartment, things like that.
Now, the work report has pledged more efforts to build a unified national market and address those involution-style competition. So, Professor Gong, how could the efforts in this regard help boost domestic demand here in China?
Well, a unified market is actually very important. It goes back to the first American antitrust law to eliminate any practices that impede what they call intercommerce trade. Here in China, we're pretty much doing the same thing, taking down any barriers to interprovincial or interregional trade, ruling out practices that impede competition from other areas. I think the fundamental issue is that a unified market contributes to efficiency. There's plenty of empirical evidence in economics literature talking about the integration of the market. A unified market contributes to economic growth, increases competition, increases efficiency. Usually, people don't quite understand why a unified market has something to do with the consumption pattern, right? Enhancing consumption. It's actually very important. There's a basic economic theory behind it. So that's why I think by working towards a unified market is one of the ingredients to enhancing consumption as well.
Now, in the meantime, China has set a target of creating 12 million new urban jobs in 2026. The work report mentions the building of an employment-friendly development model. So, Sultan, how do you think China can build such a development model?
Well, that's a very interesting question, and but I'll be brief in my response. First of all, please remember that growth through labor-intensive services like healthcare, education, and logistics. This can give a major boost. Then this support for the SMEs with financing and digital tools. This will empower the people, and then linking industrial upgrading with job creation in green tech as well as artificial intelligence. Now, along with this, ensuring inclusive growth for the youth and migrants. So, in a nutshell, it is jobs through services, SMEs, and innovation.
So, if we take a look at the official number for last year's economic development, Professor Gong, we understand the number of urban jobs created in China over the course of last year was higher than 12 million. So, I guess presumably China would find it not too difficult to fulfill this year's goal for job creation. But having said that, now it seems a government focus is aimed at boosting high quality employment. So what is your understanding of higher quality employment, and how can China pursue its relevant goals in that very direction?
Okay, so first of all, I wouldn't underestimate the challenges of creating jobs. Last year, it's true that we created 12 million jobs, but we're also facing the challenge of the AI phenomenon, which means that the machines are more and more replacing people. Demand for labor is getting smaller over the long run. So I think that's a big challenge. And nevertheless, I think we still try ways of creating more jobs, especially for the young people and college graduates. When you talk about high quality jobs, inevitably we're talking about jobs creating more value, they're paying more so that people have a better life. I think it's important to have these high quality jobs as opposed to jobs just merely meet ends meet. It's important, especially for young people, to have a decent income so they can start their life in society.
So, why do you think, Professor Gong, according to the work report, China is planning to further open up sectors like telecommunications, biotechnology, and hospitals to foreign investment over the course of this year?
Yeah, well, these are the industries that haven't been really open in the past. It's an issue that goes back to the very beginning of China joining the WTO. We made the commitments that some sectors will be open gradually over time. And I think these industries are sort of the remaining in the last set of industries that foreign companies would like to enter. Obviously, there are some industries that are concerning national security, for example, telecom. Usually, it's very difficult for countries to open entirely to foreign companies because of the sensitive nature of this industry. Nevertheless, I think it's good to see that we decide to also open the last set of industries that foreign companies want access to, including the telecom industry. I think this is a very important posture on China's part that we're willing to open more sectors in our economy.
Over the next 5 years, over the medium to longer term, China has actually set a target of increasing the funding for research and development by an average of 7% annually. So, Sultan, what do you think this tells us about China's resolve to pursue science-tech self-reliance?
Well, Dikang, this is a clear evidence that the Chinese government has a clear resolve for science and technology self-reliance. And this goes directly, in consonance with the practice and with the policies of the last many decades. But in this particular report, I notice that it further not only magnifies, but it solidifies the resolve. Because you see, building ecosystems in artificial intelligence, semiconductors, green energy, biotech, now these are all very, very solid goals. And if you pursue them, I'm sure it not only is going to lead towards sci-tech self-reliance, but it will also reduce the dependence on foreign supply chains. Now, and also, please remember, it positions innovation as the primary driver of modernization, which I think has been the baseline for the current government and also most of the previous governments too.
So, Professor Gong, in terms of pursuing science-tech self-reliance, what do you make of the core issues that should be addressed, that should be dealt with here in China? Is it simply a matter of increasing the funding for research and development?
Well, it's more than just a funding issue, obviously. I think we need to have an ecosystem that is amenable to innovation, that is amenable to venture capital investment, that is amenable to getting a healthy return from those R&D related investment. I think after years and years of continuous investments in innovation, in R&D, Chinese companies and other institutions have started to see more results. We are talking about an explosion of innovation outcomes across the board in many industries, especially in emerging new industries and sectors. We're not just talking about one deep seek moment. We're talking about a sea of deep seek moments.
Yeah.
So I think the entire global sentiment, narrative about China's innovation has entirely changed. Investments are coming back to China, and companies are starting to realize this is a place for great innovations moving forward.
Hmm. So, by the way, Professor Gong, do you think China's move to double down on science-tech advancement, including self-dependence, will end up driving China's own economic growth for the future?
There's no doubt about it. I mean, if you look at the GDP composition, GDP growth composition from a sectoral basis, it's pretty clear that growth in those emerging new industries, new sectors are growing much, much faster than the traditional sectors and industries. In some cases, we're talking about double-digit growth here. So I think there's no doubt that these sectors could be an engine of growth to drive China's economy ahead. And my hope is that these industries and sectors will be growing fast enough to take a larger share of China's economy to pull the entire economy ahead.
Hmm. So, Sultan, what is your take? Do you think tech innovation will necessarily lead to better and higher economic growth in China?
Well, thank you for asking my opinion on this. I was hoping you would. My take on this is that doubling down on scientific technology is not just about self-reliance. It is about creating new growth engines. Now, you see, frontier technologies like artificial intelligence, biotech, and clean energy, they will actually reshape the industries and productivity. So, in my opinion, this ensures China's economy remains competitive globally and resilient domestically. So, in a nutshell, SciTech is the engine of future growth.
Hmm. So in 2026, Sultan, we understand China plans to cut carbon dioxide emissions per unit of GDP by some 3.8% and by 17% by the year 2030, namely by the end of China's 15th five-year plan. So what do you think will enable China to reach those goals in terms of pursuing low carbon development?
Well, you see, it is interesting because these goals in pursuing low carbon development are actually achievable through expanding renewable energy capacity and also by promoting green consumption and trade in programs. And thirdly, by advancing energy efficiency in industry and transport. So, what China is actually doing is it is aligning its climate goals with economic modernization, ensuring sustainability. So, what it stands to is green growth, cleaner future, sustainable China.
So, sustainable, beautiful China, do you think these goals will have any inspirations for your own country, Sultan?
Yeah, actually, there is a need for such clear thinking because, as the professor also mentioned, and
Mm,
you are aware that we are living in very troubled times where, there is not a clear thought process in so many of the other leading countries who are more engaged, in, I'm sorry to say, use the word, in creating chaos and entanglement, which is not necessary. So, amongst all this, this particular report from China and otherwise also the slogan of green growth, cleaner future, sustainable China, it stands as a loud and clear message for people in Pakistan who want to go ahead, who want to improve their quality of life. So, in a nutshell, if you see, my personal opinion is that as we look ahead, the message from this year's two sessions from China is clear that China is charting a path of stability, innovation, and sustainability. And by building a unified national market, fostering employment friendly growth, opening strategic sectors, and doubling down on green development, the country is positioning itself to not only weather the uncertainties but to lead in shaping the future global economy. So, in a sense, China's story in 2026 is one of confidence, confidence in its people, in its innovation, and in its ability to deliver growth that is both high quality and sustainable, which stands as something which should be emulated by countries like Pakistan.
Thank you very much for joining us. Sultan Ali, a China observer and a retired Air Force officer based in Pakistan, as well as Professor John Gong joining us from the University of International Business and Economics. You're listening to World Today. I'm Ding Han in Beijing. We'll be back after a short break. You're back with World Today. I'm Ding Han in Beijing. Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi says China will send its special Middle East envoy to regional countries to conduct mediation efforts. In a phone conversation with his Saudi Arabian counterpart, Wang Yi said China has always been a force for peace and stands ready to continue to play a constructive role. Regarding the escalating conflict in the Middle East, the senior Chinese diplomat said the indiscriminate use of force is unacceptable and that any attack on innocent civilians and non-military targets must be condemned. China is urging all parties to cease military operations, return to dialogue and negotiations at an early date, and prevent further escalation of tensions. Wang Yi also spoke with the foreign minister of the United Arab Emirates, or the UAE, saying the spillover of the war serves no one's interests. So joining us now on the line is Professor Wang Jing from Northwest University in Xi'an, China. Thank you very much for joining us.
It's my pleasure.
So first of all, what do you think has really made China to decide to send a special envoy to mediate in this Iran conflict?
Well, I think many reasons facilitate or many reasons drives China to send a new special envoy to the Middle East to help melt down the divisions and pacify the tension in the Middle East. And first of all, I think we have to know that when the war continues, actually it attracts attention from the international society. And everyone in this world now is very focusing on this ongoing war very closely. So including China, because China also wants the war to be ended and wants the peace come back to the region. And the second one, I think China also is very closely related to the ongoing war. And we have to know that when the Hormuz Strait is now under closure by the war, and particularly the war is still escalating and expanding to the other parts of the Gulf region and even to the Red Sea region. So it means that nobody is safe in this region. And also we know that China actually has very close ties, energy ties with the regional countries. So that's why China hopes that the war should be suspended and as early as possible. Last but not least, we cannot forget that maybe within upcoming months, China and the Arab Summit will be held. So it is very important for China to dialogue, to hold a dialogue, to listen to the voices from the different Arab states, particularly the Gulf Arab states, over the ongoing war between the United States and Iran. So that's why many reasons finally led to China's new special envoy to the Middle East to help the local countries to establish new channels for dialogue and communication.
Now, in his phone conversation with Saudi Arabia's foreign minister, Wang Yi said that China does not want to see the Middle East conflict spreading to Gulf states such as Saudi Arabia. He also said that China appreciates Saudi Arabia for exercising restraint and that achieving regional reconciliation is rare and valuable and should be cherished. What messages do you read from Wang Yi?
I think it suggested that Wang Yi as well as China cherish the relations with Saudi Arabia very closely because we know Saudi Arabia is a very important leader of the Arab world. And Saudi Arabia's attitudes and stances against the ongoing war between the United States, Iran, and Israel would very strongly affect the attitudes of many other Arab states. So when the Arab states are actually at the middle of the war, because on the one hand, they don't agree with the United States as well as Israel, the military strikes against the targets inside Iran, but also on the other hand, they are also suffered by the counterattacks from Iran, so make them into the kind of dilemma. So that's why it is very important for the Saudi Arabia as well as the other Gulf Arab states and the whole Arab world to maintain and stay rational and restrained, because once they started new military activities, they start new waves of counterattacks. It means that the war will be further escalated, and the scale of the war will be further enlarged. So that's why I think China's stance is very clear that everybody should become restrained, and the dialogue should be resumed, and the mediation efforts should be enhanced.
Now, we're several days into this war. So, what is your main observation so far regarding the conflict itself?
I think the conflict is still ongoing, as we see clearly, and we cannot forget the possibility of further escalation, because from the rhetorics from the United States that they believe they are fully prepared for maybe the war be prolonged. As Donald Trump mentioned, that maybe the United States will continue to attack Iran for for more than another week, nearly another 2 weeks. It would be very dangerous for the regional country, and also from the Iranians' rhetorics, very assertive and very hardline rhetorics, particularly the ongoing political transition of the supreme leader inside Iran. It means that Iran might also continue counterattack. So that's why I think the war will continue. But also, on the other hand, we cannot forget that the willingness of the international community, as well as the regional countries, for the peace comeback is also gradually enhanced, because the Arab states don't want the war continue, and the global countries, they don't want the war continue. So that's why the peace efforts will be enhanced too. So that's why opportunities and the risks are combined together. And that's why we're facing a very crucial moment right now.
Not only the international community's sentiment is against this ongoing conflict, but also, I guess, overwhelmingly domestically in America, opinion polls have shown that most Americans don't agree or don't support this war with Iran. But that being said, Dr. Wang, why do you think a bipartisan resolution in America aimed at limiting President Donald Trump's ability to wage war in Iran to continue to do so has failed to pass in the U.S. Senate?
Well, I think because in the Senate, because the Republicans, they are the majority, the seats, they enjoy the majority seats. So it would be very difficult for any kind of the proposal to be passed into the kind of the act or the kind of the law to limit the power of the president for declaration of war. But you are right. It is because even during the past 2 months or nearly 3 months, many things, particularly the White House, did violate the very clear borders of the power or the authority between the White House and the Congress, because as you mentioned, the declaration of war abroad belongs to the hands of Congress, where the White House has no power or authority to declare war or launch a major war against any other foreign countries. Although right now, the United States, according to the rhetorics of Donald Trump, they didn't declare war. But actually, what they are doing, indeed, is start a war in Venezuela, and also to start another war right now is ongoing in Iran, and then and right now is bringing all of the Americans in the Middle East into the dangerous scenarios. So that's why I think it is a very crucial time, not only for the regional country, as you mentioned, but also it is a very important time for the United States people themselves to determine what the country should be and what the future of their country's foreign diplomacy, as well as political structure, should be constructed. It is a very critical moment right now.
The final question before we let you go, Professor Wang. We understand the United States has a history of working with Kurdish groups in Iraq and in neighboring Iraq and Syria, etc. Now, according to multiple media reports, the U.S. is in talks with opposition Kurdish forces in an attempt to arm them and create a kind of uprising domestically in Iran. What could be the danger of such a move if those media reports are true?
I think maybe it's true, but I don't think it's actually could be realized very successfully. But as you mentioned, first of all, what the United States right now is doing is to try to violate the sovereignty of independence and the political unity of the other country. I mean, if it's followed or if it was tolerated, it means that more similar things would be done, not only maybe by the United States, but also would be done by other countries. And then no state is safe because everybody and every country in the modern world, the majority of them, absolutely majority of the states in the modern world, they all have the so-called minority problems. Nobody is kind of the division is zero, internal division is zero. Every country has internal division. So it would create a very dangerous example. And on the other hand, I think it also would add new uncertainties to Iran. And for the regional countries, might not it's not be a good news because when the Kurdish groups inside Iran they were rearmed, they might be used to target the Iranians' internal unity, but they also could become the very important harbor for the Kurdish regional militias attacking Turkey, attacking Syria, even attacking Kurdish groups inside Iraq. So it means that open the door for uncertainties. So nobody is safe in this region. So that's why I think the international and regional countries, they should oppose the United States very strongly and assertively.
Thank you very much for joining us, Professor Wang Jing from Northwest University in Xi'an, China. Coming up, a U.S. court orders U.S. Customs to process refunds on illegal Trump tariffs. This is World Today. We'll be back.
Hello, I am Dr. Digby James Wren, a political analyst and international relations scholar specializing in China area studies. World Today offers unmatched in-depth perspectives on China's politics, economics, business, technology, and society. World Today's team of reporters and contributors provides valuable information from all of the world's major economies. I hope you can join me on World Today for the very best insights and news from China, on China, and help to build a better understanding of China's role in the world today.
You are back with World Today. I'm Ding Hen in Beijing. The U.S. Court of International Trade has ordered the U.S. Customs and Border Protection to pay refunds for tariffs imposed under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act. The refunds are estimated to reach $175 billion US. The order could also help resolve more than 2,000 lawsuits currently before the court. Meanwhile, U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent says Washington is likely to implement a 15% global tariff this week. The new tariff is intended to replace the sweeping global import duties imposed by President Donald Trump last year, which was recently struck down by the Supreme Court. The White House actually responded to that particular ruling by the Supreme Court by imposing a 10% levy, despite President Donald Trump claiming on social media that it would be 15%. For more, my colleague Do Hongyu spoke with Professor Yao Shujie, Chang Kong Professor of Economics with Chongqing University.
$175 billion of refunds. What does that mean to the U.S. government system? And how realistic is it for the government to process refunds of such a scale? And how quickly could importers expect to see that money?
It is a very complicated issue. $175 billion US of import refund to the importers or the exporter in foreign countries is a very complicated project. It's easy to impose the tariff, but it's very difficult to refund the tariff. I think it may take at least a few months or even more than 1 year to do the total refund. However, the total refund is determined by the Supreme Court of the United States. I think it got to be eventually implemented. Because currently there's lots of lawsuits against Donald Trump's decision to impose this unexpected tariff, which, according to the Supreme Court, is against the U.S. general interest and the U.S. law.
And now there are more than 2,000 lawsuits related to these tariffs still pending. How significant is this decision for resolving legal disputes over the use of emergency powers in U.S. trade policy?
The emergency power have a limited degree of authority because even the administration or the president have a limited power of how to impose the tariff against another country because there is a long-term interest of the United States in general by suddenly and periodically impose this emergency tariff by a certain president at different periods, it would actually undermine the U.S. credit in the international trade system. If some of the lawsuits come out to be successful, other people will follow the step to launch the lawsuit. This would give a significant headache for the United States government. Not only the amount of money is highly significant, given that the U.S. already run into a huge amount of deficit, and also the government in different states and also different parts of the country is already facing a lot of financial constraint. Now, by this additional amount of money that need to be refunded, and also not only the direct cost of refunding, but there's an indirect cost of supporting the legal system. So this is a very big lesson for the Trump administrations. The so-called very erratic personal decision on the spot to impose tariff against other countries could even violate the domestic law. I think the administration and the Supreme Court have a very clear conflict. And in my view, it's the short-term and long-term interests of the country, that is the United States. And this is why the lawsuits and also the funding become a very sensitive issue at the moment.
And despite the ruling, U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent has indicated that his country is likely to implement a 15% global tariff this week, while Donald Trump previously announced similar measures that were struck down by the Supreme Court. How might the administration legally justify a new round of tariffs after the court ruling?
Yeah, Mr. Bessent, it is certainly supported by Donald Trump. They have the same idea of how to implement tariff against other countries. 15% of tariff is going to be implemented globally to different countries, and it have to base on a U.S. law, which turned out to be legal. And in the future stage, if the Supreme Court found out that this kinds of law still violated the national, constituency, the national basic law, then there could be another problem. I would just, personally would feel that couldn't understand why Donald Trump and Mr. Bessent is so keen to implement these kinds of additional tariff, because the people who bear the cost will be mostly the domestic consumers, and it will drive the inflation up even further, making the general public life is more difficult for daily life. And this is not just against the interests of other countries; it's mainly against the interests of the domestic consumers. So it is very, ironic in a sense. But Donald Trump is such a person. He wants to demonstrate his personal power. He wants to show to the outsiders, people in other countries, to say, yeah, I'm a very specialized president. I can do something which other president would normally do not do. And he tried to establish the uniqueness, including the mega policy, which had been implemented since the first round of the administration and is now continuing in the second round. And not only the international trade, as you can see, the recent Iran crisis and also Venezuela, all these kinds of attitude is reflecting Donald Trump's personal idea and characteristic. I think he's going to make the U.S. itself more and more difficult in the future, and not only in the trade system, but also in the global peace and also development issue.
And now there are also disagreements over the new tariff rate. The White House planned to impose a 10% levy, but Trump wants 15%. How might this policy ambiguity affect global markets, supply chains, and business confidence?
This is precisely the purpose of Donald Trump. Donald Trump is using a stick around the global trading system to say, I'm the big brother, and I can, stir the international trade system whatever way I use. So his personal is not even fearful of the repercussion by the Supreme Court, decision. As you see, as the Supreme Court voted against his decision and decided to refund the trade tariff, he still maintained another way of using the tariff, 10 or 15% to some extent for most countries. It doesn't matter now. Actually, particularly in China, in many other major trading partners in Europe, Japan, South Korea, whatever you name, they probably have get used to this kinds of threat and uncertainty, and the domestic trading system is already quickly adjusted to this kinds of uncertainty. However, whatever trading partner have responded to Donald Trump's erratic policy, it already sent a lot of problem and risk in the international trading system. And not only the trade, the supply chain, the production chain, the technological chain, all going to have change, under this kinds of uncertainty. Certainly, the United States still a major trading nations, but it's not going to be wholly dominant because Germany, China, and other countries, they are still playing a fairly significant role in the international trading system. So lots of trading partners, they are going to see alternative channel where they can have more established and more certain pattern of trading decision. So in the longer term, I think the United States is going to make itself into a deeper and deeper trouble. And if they don't stop this, I think the trust on the United States is going to getting lower and lower, which can fight back to the U.S. commercial system.
Professor Yao Shujie with Chongqing University talking with my colleague Dou Hongyu. You're listening to World Today. I'm Ding Hen in Beijing. The European Commission has proposed a controversial industrial act to prioritize made in the EU goods in public support and procurement. A draft proposal says the Industrial Accelerator Act would target strategic industries, including energy-intensive industries, net-zero technology manufacturing, and the auto supply chain. The EU is looking to raise manufacturing to 20% of the bloc's GDP by 2035. Deep divisions persist among EU member states over this particular proposed act. Ireland and some Nordic countries have cautioned that strict local content thresholds could end up clashing with the EU's open market principles. In the meantime, Britain, Japan, and the United States have also expressed concerns over the Made in the EU and Buy European initiatives. So joining us now on the line is Liang Lingling, Director of Communication and Research with China Chamber of Commerce to the European Union. Welcome back to the show.
Thank you for having me.
So why is the proposed act we are talking about here being criticized by some, including some internal voices within the European Union, as a misguided or protectionist approach?
Thanks. This is really a good question. You know, the IAA has been a thing in town for a very long time. So everyone was discuss it, and we have a lot of leaked versions prior to the official release of yesterday. And you know that it was also postponed for several times. So basically, in Brussels, you can feel that the very heated discussion around this legislation. So the all on and on debate really reflects a very broad tension within the EU between strengthening industrial competitiveness and preserving the EU's long-standing commitment to open markets. Some policymakers and member states, as you rightly said, they worry that prioritizing made in EU goods in public support and procurement could tell the playing field in ways that resemble protectionist industrial policy rather than market-based competitiveness. So from the business perspective, concerns mainly central on three aspects. First, the strict local content requirements risk fragmenting supply chains that are currently highly internationalized. And European industries, from automotive to renewable energy, really depend on global partners for technology, capital, and components. And second, such measures could potentially conflict with the EU's traditional advocacy of open trade and multilateral rules. And third, they may trigger tit-for-tat measures from trading partners, which could ultimately reduce the efficiency and market opportunities for the European companies themselves. So that is why some member states, particularly those with the very strong export-oriented economies, had cautioned that the industry policy should enhance competitiveness. And of course, a lot of trading partners like China have expressed concerns around it.
So we understand the proposal would tighten conditions on foreign direct investment in industries including the electric vehicles as well as batteries, for example, solar panel and critical raw materials. So if the proposal is adopted, how do you think it might affect the EV cooperation, for example, between China and Europe?
Well, we currently have the initiative from the Commission, and for next steps, the Parliament and the EU member states would debate on it, and let's see what the final version will be. But the starting point, the current proposal on IAA, to many business executives and observers already a very concerning beginning step. So if the final law is adapted as it is proposed right now, we are in the view that the IAA will cast a very, very dark shadow over the cooperation between China and the EU regarding a lot of areas, including EV. So the cooperation between Chinese and European companies in the electric vehicle ecosystem has developed precisely because both sides bring complementary strengths to each other. China has built large-scale manufacturing capacity and mutual battery supply chains, while Europe offers very strong engineering capabilities, advanced research, and important consumer markets. So if the very strict foreign ownership caps or mandatory technology transfer requirements were introduced, this could complicate investment decisions for international companies. And such conditions could create uncertainties about governance structures, intellectual property protection, and long-term commercial viability. So as a result, some investors might reassess the scale of timing of new projects. And more broadly, the EV transition is a global challenge, and achieving climate goals requires rapid development of affordable electric vehicles and resilient supply chains. So cooperation between Chinese and European companies through joint ventures, technology partnerships, and investment has played a very constructive role in accelerating this transition. But policies like IAA could be detrimental if it is adopted like this. It could be very detrimental to the future cooperation, I'm afraid.
Thank you very much for joining us. Liang Lingling, Director of Communication and Research with the China Chamber of Commerce to the European Union. That's all the time for this edition of World Today. I'm Ding in Beijing. Thank you so much for listening. Bye for now.